Hi, third graders. Yesterday, you should have worked on your main idea informational writing, and we're going to finish that writing up today. So grab it if you don't have it, and let's get ready to work. Okay, I want you to warm up your brain by thinking back to yesterday's lesson about writing for the main idea. On a scratch piece of paper, so that just means like an extra piece of paper. You're not going to do anything with it, but this is just to write down your thoughts. So on a scratch piece of paper, I want you to write down the 5 different types of sentences that are in the hamburger organizer. So pause the video and think about that for a minute, and then unpause it when you're done. Okay, so this is what you should have written down on that paper. The first thing you should have is the topic sentence or the main idea sentence. That's the top of the hamburger bun, or the top, if you want to call it a sandwich, the top part of the hamburger or sandwich. Then you should have 3 supporting key detail sentences. That is the good stuff in the middle. And then the last one that you should have written is a conclusion sentence, and that's where we're going to explain how the key details support the main idea, and we're going to work on that today. So that brings us to today's learning target. Today we will determine the main idea of a text. We will recount or retell the key details, and this is what we're really going to focus on here. Explain how those key details support the main idea. When you watched yesterday's video for your reading lesson, I asked you to plan a few things that we're going to need for our writing assignment for today. So from yesterday, you should have written down what the main idea of the Yellowstone Old Faithful Geyser article was. You should also have found 3 supporting details that came from the text. And today, we're going to add how the details that you found in the article support the main idea. And that's going to be our conclusion sentence. And I'll show you how to do that today. All right, your assignment from yesterday was to get your Scholastic News that should have been in your red reading folder. It's the election issue, and then in the back there was this article called A Landmark Anniversary. So your job was to read this article yesterday. You should have already determined the main idea. You should have written down at least 3 key details that tell you more about the main idea, and you should have your piece of paper ready. So if you haven't read this article yet and have not found the main idea and 3 details, I want you to do that now. Pause the video, on a piece of paper, write down the main idea and 3 supporting details. During yesterday's class meeting, I showed you how to start some sentences that go with each of those parts that I asked you to write about. So on your piece of paper, if you didn't do this already, I want you to start your sentence for the first one that says the main idea of, and you need to put the title of the text in that part where I put the parentheses, and then write what you thought the main idea of the story was. Then for the key detail sentences, you should have started your sentences with something like this. It doesn't have to be exactly. You could have said one key detail from the text is, and then you wrote your key detail. You could have also said another key detail from the text, or you could say another key detail from paragraph 2 is. And you can also use that the author said something. So you could say a third key detail the author mentioned was, and you can use those sentence starters. Today, we're going to finish our writing using this sentence. So if you didn't start this already, I want you to write this down on your paper. In conclusion, that means we're at the end of the writing. These details support the main idea. And then we might use the word because, we might use the word by. It just depends on what the rest of our sentence is going to say. So on your paper that you started from yesterday, I want you to write this down. In conclusion, these details support the main idea. And we'll decide what we're going to use because or by when we are doing our explanation. So go ahead and pause the video and write that sentence starter down. Before we fill in that last sentence on our paragraph, let's take a look at the article together and let's check how you did with the main idea and the key details. Now, you may not have exactly what I have, but something along the same lines should be on your paper. So the first thing I asked you to do was to find the main idea of this article. So after I read the whole article, I was looking in the text for a sentence that might help me out. And I found a sentence at in the last sentence of the first paragraph. And it talks about how Old Faithful is now a famous site in Yellowstone National Park. And I started to think to myself, is that mostly what this article is about? And I decided, yes, this is mostly about Old Faithful being a geyser in Yellowstone National Park. So however you chose to word your sentence is fine, but it needs to be something about Old Faithful and that it's famous. So now that we have our main idea, I needed to give examples of why Old Faithful is famous. So I looked through the details in the text, and the first one I came up with was this first sentence, that explorers found Old Faithful 150 years ago. So that is pretty neat that this is a pretty old geyser and it's still exploding in Yellowstone. So that's one example of how Old Faithful is famous and why people would come to visit every year. I needed to think of another key detail from the text that would tell why Old Faithful is famous, and I found this one. Water shot from the ground, rocketing 125 feet in the air. So I thought, wow, that's pretty high. So that could be a main or a key detail on why Old Faithful is famous. So I needed to find one more detail that makes Old Faithful famous. And I was looking here toward the end of the text, and it says that Old Faithful is one of the most predictable. That means that you can really count on it happening. And it says it rarely goes more than 110 minutes without erupting. So you could almost set a clock to it and say, okay, it's going to erupt at this time. So I found my main idea and 3 supporting details that give me more information about the main idea. So let's look at a paragraph and how it would look in writing. Okay, on that piece of paper that you have, hopefully you wrote down the sentence starters and you have already filled in the first 4 sentences. Let's see how it should look. Remember, we're using the hamburger as our graphic organizer. What that means is it's something that we can visualize in our head to help us organize our writing. So that first sentence should have started with the main idea of a landmark anniversary, because that's the title of the text. The main idea of a landmark anniversary is Old Faithful is a famous site in Yellowstone National Park. Now that's what I wrote. You can have something similar to it. It doesn't have to be exact. Now the next sentence should be a key detail, and I chose to write one key detail from the text says, and then I chose the one about how Old Faithful was found 150 years ago. My next key detail sentence says, another key detail the author says is, so that was my sentence starter, another key detail the author says is, Old Faithful is a geyser that shoots hot water out of the ground. So that gives me information about Old Faithful. And I could also say or I should have added how high the water shoots. And my third key detail from the text, I chose to refer back to paragraph 3. And my sentence says, a third key detail in paragraph 3 says, Old Faithful is one of the most predictable geysers in the park. Okay, so I have my main idea and my 3 key details. That last sentence is what we're focusing on this week. Why did we choose these 3 details? How do they support the main idea? Well, let's go back to our main idea. It says that Old Faithful is a famous site in Yellowstone National Park. So I chose those 3 details because they are examples of why Old Faithful is famous. So I am going to add my last sentence to this paragraph, and I'm starting that sentence by saying in conclusion, because that means I'm wrapping it up. This is the last sentence. In conclusion, these details support the main idea by, so why do they support the main idea? Well, they support the main idea because they explain why Old Faithful is a famous geyser in Yellowstone National Park. So why is it famous? Well, it's famous because it's 150 years old. It shoots hot water out of the ground 125 feet up in the air, and it's one of the most predictable geysers in all of Yellowstone National Park. So those are 3 examples of why Old Faithful is a famous geyser in Yellowstone National Park. So on your piece of paper that you have, I want you to add this conclusion sentence or something similar to it. Okay, so when you put all of those sentences together on a piece of paper, this is what the finished product would look like. Notice the first sentence is what we call indented. That means it's moved in a little bit to show that that's the beginning of the paragraph. The words that are in bold print are my sentence starters, and you'll notice each of those sentences follow along with our hamburger graphic organizer. So let's look what it says. The main idea of a landmark anniversary is Old Faithful is a famous site in Yellowstone National Park. One key detail from the text says Old Faithful was found 150 years ago. Another key detail the author says is Old Faithful is a geyser that shoots hot water out of the ground. A third key detail in paragraph 3 says Old Faithful is one of the most predictable geysers in the park. In conclusion, these details support the main idea by explaining why Old Faithful is a famous geyser in Yellowstone National Park. Boys and girls, look at that. That is an awesome paragraph, and you can do this all on your own as long as you follow the sentence starters and organize your paragraph the way I showed you using the hamburger graphic organizer. So guess what? It's going to be your turn to practice. So here's your assignment for today. I want you to add the conclusion sentence to your writing from yesterday. I want you to highlight or underline the sentence starters that you used. So the main idea sentence, how did that start? The 3 key detail sentences, how did you start those? And then your conclusion sentence, what was your sentence starter for that sentence? I want you to also reread your paragraph to yourself, probably out loud, because that's how we catch our mistakes. So reread your paragraph to make sure it makes sense. And then I want you to keep this in your red reading folder because you're going to use it again as a guide for our lesson on Thursday. We're going to practice again with a brand new story on Thursday and you're going to be writing your own main idea paragraph. Remember, do your best work, and writing takes time and practice to become a great writer, but we're going to practice a lot this year, so by the end of 3rd grade, you're going to be awesome. All right, boys and girls, keep up the good work, and we'll see you later.